Ali, we might just get kicked off.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. All right, I'll stop sharing this particular screen and then we can be back to our panel view. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. And as you hopefully know, you've joined the Rethinking Research Translation Solutions to Drive New Technology webinar. This is the second webinar in our series on knowledge transfer between universities and industry across all sectors, including government, and its practical application. So we have a great panel with us today. And before I get into that, I just want to talk about how this webinar is hosted by the APR.Intern program. If you haven't come across the APR.Intern program before, we actually facilitate these kinds of relationships between industry and governments and universities. So we work in all sectors and in all disciplines, and we facilitate these relationships through PhD internships, and we create research collaborations that are often ongoing. We also provide these employment skills to PhD students, which can lead to long-term career progression for those PhD students, which is always a fabulous outcome of our program. So this webinar, we're going to be talking to representatives from the Australian Space Agency, from Clearbox Systems, working in the space industry sector, from the Centre of Entrepreneurial Agri-Technology, who have been talking about space and agriculture. And it's really interesting to hear about the interrelation between those two areas that you wouldn't necessarily put together. We've got innovation connections, and we've got partnerships at UTS, and of course, the fabulous Chad Renando, who'll be facilitating our discussion. And everyone will get a chance to introduce themselves in a moment. But first, I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather in our spaces across the country today, and I would like to pay respects to elders past, present and future. And some housekeeping now. If you would like to chat amongst yourselves, please feel free to open up the chat function and chat away. If you have any questions, use the Q&A function and we will ask those at the end. If there are any questions in the chat, I'll refer to those as well, but the Q&A will make it a bit easier. So now I'm going to hand over to Chad for facilitation of the discussion. Let's get going.
Excellent. Thanks, Ali. I'm really, really excited. And as some of you guys who have already hopped on in the attendee list have heard, like, it's just what's happening with space is incredible. Like it seems like it's just going faster and faster. We're advancing and just uncovering new technologies. Mars is light years away, it feels like, but maybe just around the corner. And people are building habitats for it now. And it's, you know, from throwing satellites up, there's just so many things happening. But the question we have is, how can we make it happen faster? Australia is known for just incredible research that we do, but the D part of R&D, the development of research and development, there's a history of maybe not so much. And so how do we do that better? So this series of conversations we've been having over the past few months have been focusing on different sectors, different approaches. And today we're going to be talking about space and how do we translate research better. There's a lot of organizations focusing on that, including APR.Intern and CSIRO and a few others, and definitely within the universities. But today we have a really good opportunity here for people involved in that complete supply chain, you know, from the actual businesses themselves to the people supporting the translation, the people that are doing the research, to the overall, you know, space industry as a whole. And what do we need? So the question for the panelists today, and the first one I'm going to be open up with is, you know, definitely the basics. Who are you and what do you do? But then what I'd love to hear from you is, where do you see the opportunities for research to be most effective in the space industry? So we're doing all this research, we heard some stories about just stuff happening, but how can it be more effective? Meaning, how can we actually do something with it better? What are those opportunities? You're curious, you know, is it in putting stuff into space faster and better? Is it, you know, maybe building livable habitats in space? Is it taking the technology from space and putting it into other industry sectors? What are those opportunities? And so I might just start off with, Marty, I'm going to kick off with you and get your views on it, because I'd love to hear from a kind of an industry engagement side of things, what you're seeing. What are the opportunities? So who are you, what do you do, and where can we go?
So my name is Martin Amidy. As Ali said, I work for the Centre for Entrepreneurial Agri-Technology at the Australian National University. I run the industry engagement program at CEAT. From our point of view, obviously, it's around taking the capabilities of the ANU and CSIRO and tapping that into the ag sector. But in saying that, we've also recently been investigating opportunities to look at space technologies and apply those in ag. And as Chad had said, through those conversations, we've kind of also ended up in a place where we're talking about agricultural applications in space as well, which is really interesting. And I think from my point of view, I'd probably take a slightly different tack based on those conversations, which is there's obviously the piece around the research that we do and that's on the shelf and the capacity and how we turn that into solutions from a space perspective. But I think from my point of view and the approach that we take at CEAT, it's also really not just about the research and the knowledge creation from a research perspective, but it's more around the co-creation with industry. So bringing industry in and embedding industry in the university. And I guess for context, that's what CEAT has done in terms of they brought me as someone who's come from industry for 15 years and now within academia to bring that understanding of the sector and what the challenges and needs are. And I think from a university point of view, the engagement with industry is really the most important thing in understanding what the pain points are, the needs and the challenges, and making sure that we're using that to shape and frame our research and making sure that it is problem and solution driven rather than being a research push, and that we're not creating hammers and then trying to find nails. And I think if you look at all the OECD reports, the Australian research sector is fantastic at doing high quality research. We do struggle a bit more when it comes to actually translating that into commercial outcomes, into IP and into patents that find their way into industry and have meaningful impacts from that perspective. So I think there are those challenges there as well around how we engage with industry, what the requirements and needs are on both sides of that. And as I said, IP is one of the things that can at times become a sticking point. So it's not like it seems like a no-brainer, but it doesn't happen for a reason. There are some rubs that do slow things up. But I think the more that we can work with industry partners and better understand what their needs are and bring them in as part of that co-creation process from the start, I think that's going to help us to go a long way to solving a lot of those challenges. And how do we take research and turn it into industry impact, because we've actually shaped the research agenda based on the needs rather than doing the research to create the knowledge and then at times potentially thinking about the commercialization as a bit of an afterthought. So I think from my perspective, taking it, I guess flipping it and looking at the opportunity more on the co-creation side as well as the existing capacity. And in saying that, blue sky research is really important. And the reality is, if you don't do that and you're not pushing the boundaries, you'll miss out on the really big stuff that'll come along. So I guess the Henry Ford quote, I don't know if it was him that said it, but that idea that if he had given people what they wanted, he would have made a faster horse. You need people pushing the boundaries to move things along. But I think that needs to be done in the context of an understanding of the industry application and where you're looking to go with that research. So I think in a nutshell, that's kind of the approach we're taking at CEAT, which is let's bring industry in, let's partner with them from the start. Let's build collaboration and research that's really focused on their needs and their pain points. And we'll always do the fundamental research because we are a research intensive university. So that's a given for us. But having those conversations early and embedding industry in the university, and in the same way also having the university go out into industry through secondments and placements to give academics a better understanding of how industry works, I think is really important to sort of bridging some of those gaps.
Yeah, thanks for Marty. And just a really quick 1-minute follow-up question. Like, obviously you're in the agriculture scene. Let's just test this out then with farmers and people in, engaging with agriculture. Are you seeing any specific barriers in that sector to some of the translation of some of these technologies?
Agriculture in particular is quite complex given the nature of the sector. So you've obviously got, in Australia as an example, you've got 70 to 80% of the products produced by 20% of the farms, so big corporates and large family operations. And then you've got 70 to 80% of production producing 80% of the sector producing about 20% of the production. So you have this really diverse industry out there. So agriculture, I guess, and I don't have the same in-depth knowledge of the space industry, and there might be a similar situation at the moment. We've got a lot of startups coming through, and you've got some big established players. I think government plays a much bigger role in the space sector, given the cost and the capital expenditure required to do a lot of that kind of stuff. That's my understanding of it. But I think knowing your market and being able to segment and know who they are and what they need, and that they don't all, just because the industry don't think they all need the same thing, and having an understanding of what the scale and size of that market is when you're talking to people and the context in which you engage with them. So from our point of view, having the ag tech sector build in Australia and internationally is really a recent thing. And one of the issues that you go out and you engage with industry, and without a deep understanding of what the industry is or how it functions, you do at times run the risk of selection bias. So you run an event that is an ag tech event, and farmers turn up to it, and you go, show of hands, who in the room is interested in ag tech? And the farmers put their hand up. Well, they're the 2 or 3% of the industry who's at the cutting edge, and they're after the next 1 or 2% because they've already achieved all the low-hanging fruit in technology application, where the middle part of the bell curve is probably like the 50 or 60%, and that's what you want to shift to really move the needle. But their problems and pain points aren't going to be the same as those other producers. So they mightn't have those same issues for another 5 or 10 years. And if you go to the market with a solution to solve those problems, you've actually gone out too early, and you don't have the size and scale of market that you need to have a viable product from an economic point of view long term. So I think there's the research and the technical feasibility part, but I think the other important thing from a business perspective is what's the longevity around the business model and the economics? Because if you do bring something to market too early, the reality is it will fail because you don't have enough cash flow coming in to sort of move it through and keep it viable. So that's important to keep in mind as well, I think.
Excellent. Thanks, Martin. James, I'm going to hop over to you because that was pretty interesting stats that Martin threw out there as far as the big players versus the smaller companies. I know you and I have had conversations in the past as far as how do SMEs get access to some of this R&D, because it can feel like it's out of not accessible. At the same time, within the space industry, while government's heavily regulated, we are seeing a lot of these smaller companies come up. Somebody starting out of the garages next 2 years later is launching rockets out of SA or NT. So how do some of these smaller players get access to it, and maybe some of your experience, and also kind of who you are and what do you do for some of the audience here?
Yeah, thanks, Chad. My name is James Robinson, and thanks to APR.Intern for the opportunity to participate today. I'm employed by the CSIRO as an Innovation Connections Facilitator. Innovation Connections is actually a Commonwealth Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources initiative that is really out there to connect small and medium-sized enterprises with relevant Australian research organisation expertise, for which there's also grant funding available. It's pretty broad in terms of sectors, but I suppose for the purposes of today's discussion and space and where some of that technology applies either in near or further orbits or even on Earth. I guess I'm thinking of space and relevant technology and infrastructure as a utility, like electricity or water, particularly against the maturing industry, and as you say, Chad, some of the quite new organizations that are sort of operating in that space. What I can talk about today, just from a research collaboration perspective between an SME and a research org, is I guess I'll talk around the scaffolding, I suppose, what the particular area of focus was, and then some of the elements that I saw from my participation in just assisting that collaboration to happen, what some of the sort of key key elements were. So there was a subject area, not an insignificant subject area, I suppose, that merited some further lines of inquiry, and that was really to study and identify opportunities for passive radio frequency signal monitoring to support capabilities in space domain awareness, space situational awareness. This really sort of came down to sensing data, collection and storage, really understanding how you can do that, gain relevant insights from that data, and also potentially, you know, fuse that data with other sets. From a really sort of high level, that scaffolding in relation to that area of inquiry, the things I think that that really made this successful were the different levels of precision. So you've got, you know, people with requisite skills and expertise within a business, and then also, I won't call it niche, but very focused, precise expertise within, in this case, the relevant research organization. And that really sort of came together to provide sort of requisite rigor and quality to those lines of inquiry, and to really provide a robust framework to unpack some of the early stage problems, I suppose. Evaluating performance of a platform based on, you know, selected parameters. So that's the sort of scaffolding, very generic, high level. But ultimately, what this kind of shakes out to is, you know, real world applications in the sense of improved awareness in terms of near Earth orbit activity. This could be, again, from that utilities perspective, supporting technologies that might be involved in telecommunications, maybe Earth observation, also being able to monitor space debris, maneuver detection, rapid orbit scanning, mitigation of collisions. So I think, going back to what I said previously, the sort of, there was a few sort of secret ingredients, but one that really enabled this particular collaboration to be a positive one and to really lay foundations for further work were those separate but complementary areas of expertise. So I wanted to talk about that at a general level, and obviously we've got Jeremy from Clearbox Systems, the SME that was involved in that work, who can talk to you know, a more detailed level about how that came out and what some of the really positive outcomes were. I suppose my interaction was helping to facilitate and stand up some initial research projects, but hopefully, as Jeremy might be able to sort of expand on, that it led on to some and is leading on to some bigger and better things as well.
I think it's a great handoff, and Jeremy, I think we can't do anything but hear from you next. And some of the things I just pull out from what you just said there, James, is the value of the research in being able to do things that potentially the market won't fund immediately, but is absolutely critical, such as monitoring space debris and making sure a satellite doesn't crash into our house and they don't crash into each other while they're up there, as well as, yeah, kind of doing those things that maybe, you know, won't be available in the market right now, kind of that blue sky thinking that was said before, but with commercialized opportunities later. Jeremy, what was your experience through it all? And also, I guess, you know, who you are, what you do, what your company does. And I'd also be curious as far as where you see some of the space sector going with the contribution of some of the research opportunities.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Chad, and thanks, APR.Intern, for the opportunity to be part of this webinar. And thanks for everyone that's joined. I can see some familiar names on the attendee list, so I'll appreciate you don't send me SMSs heckling me as I've been talking. The program that James facilitates that we leveraged was excellent for us to dip our toe in the water for a particular effort we're pursuing with regards to space domain awareness, with accessing some research expertise. But the reason why is not really technical. I used to be an engineer. in the glory days, but no longer. And but the reason why is actually it's economics for us, actually. And if you think about what businesses should be trying to do, whether it's the space industry or any other, is building some sort of sustainable competitive advantage. It used to be called strategic economic advantage, but then Warren Buffett called it sustainable competitive advantage. So that's what everyone calls it now, because he's worth $100 billion. So he must be right. For us, there's 3 ways we can achieve that. Lowering our cost, so the customers are more likely to buy something. That's diminishing returns and a race to the bottom, and we don't want to do that. Structural advantages within the marketplace are important. And we were talking offline just before about the recent launches done from Australia, and geography is a great example of a structural advantage for Australia in that regard with its geography for some of the launches we need to do. Structural inhibitors might be things like regulatory burdens, but our good friend Adam and the Australian Space Agency are working to remove some of those regulatory burdens and opening up some structural advantages for Australia there. And also the economies of scale and scope is another structural element for where you can achieve sustainable competitive advantage. And what we're seeing with the proliferation of the Australian space industry as nurtured by Australian Space Agency means we can achieve that. And so as businesses, we're more willing now to invest in our core competencies and in partnerships with research to hit the market when it makes sense. Those structural elements are falling into place or out of the way. And kind of like what Martin was alluding to before, if we had gone 5 years ago, it would have flopped because the marketing conditions weren't right. So now we're there. And so really what we focus in on with those things falling into place is building that value. The long-term value in the business and what we do to build that sustainable competitive advantage. And for us, our mission is to use technology to help our customers better operate and manage their communications networks and their electromagnetic spectrum resources. And success for us means that they're better able to use what they've invested heavily in, whether it's satellites or TV transmission facilities or fleet of aircraft, to then better serve their customers. And the ultimate success is when our customers point to the fact they use our technology to sell to their customers as well. So why is that relevant to partnering with academic institutions? In building value, we have core competencies which we focus on, but we can't focus on everything. So to achieve better outcomes for our customers, we need to mobilize resources outside our business. And in Australia, as you know, I think this is going to become a key theme here. The R is excellent, research. The D is not so good, development. So we're like, all right, we can do development. Let's leverage those resources outside business on the research side and pull it through to what our customers actually want. And I'm talking way too much economics for a former engineer, but you know, economics, the whole point is to take something at a value point here, do something to it to increase its value and sell it for a profit. So kind of like what Martin was talking about, there's blue sky research going on, which is so important because we've got to keep pushing the boundary of everything, but we may not know what the customer point of that is. But that's where industry comes in, because we're talking with the customers every single day. And so it's about bridging those gaps. So wheeling that all the way back around to the space domain awareness example, we had some core competencies in monitoring radio frequency signals, and satellites to communicate with the Earth use radio frequency signals. So there seemed to be an opportunity there to do something with that, except we knew nothing about the environment of orbits, how to do the maths to calculate what orbits are based on the signals that are being received, how the customer operates in certain environments, to do all of that. And fortunately, the uni that we partnered with, that James facilitated, did. And so we've been partnered together now on 2 Innovation Connections programs, which are grants we received from Department, Industry, and everything else it is these days, space. And also more recently, that's led to, out of the success of that arrangement, we've also been awarded, and the Minister announced it recently, a CRCP grant as well. And not to belittle James's grants, which are 50K each, this one is 3 million. And so back to Martin's point, we're really seeing that We bided our time, explored what we needed to do to what we needed to deliver in the market, partnered well with academic research institutions, and lo and behold, the customer's seen the value in that and is doubling down on that by investing in what we're doing to deliver to our customers.
Excellent, Jeremy. There's so much gold in what you just said there. One of them, absolute congratulations on the CRCP. It was highly competitive, really challenging to get to, but also, I guess some of the other past experience in being successful in research translation probably built up to that bigger piece of the pie. So well done on that. And also, I love the conversations from an economist perspective, and talking about the sustained competitive advantage, which is, definitely obviously geography, but we can't necessarily always take advantage of that, take that for granted. But kind of shoring up something that's hard to replicate. And the research allows us to build those sustained competitive advantages. I really, really appreciate some of the insights there. John, I want to throw over to you, because Jeremy mentioned a few different opportunities as far as working with universities to build up that sustained competitive advantage, to partner, to then, and ultimately add value. All of this is abstract and academic if it's not adding value. That came through real clear in what Jeremy was saying is, look, mate, it's got to add value from our perspective. So maybe just, how is that value added? What's been your experience potentially specific to the space sector? And also, who are you and what do you do for those tuning in?
Excellent. Thanks, Chad, and thanks, Ali and APR.Intern for hosting today and having us on board. So I'm John Szabo, Head of Partnerships at UTS, and where I sit within university is the Corporate Relations Centre. And university made a decision strategically about 5 or 6 years ago to develop our centre as a doorway to industry, to make it a much more seamless and smooth experience to navigate the university and understand, obviously, the stakeholders that would add value to the outside world, obviously from a student and academic perspective. I suppose the one thing that sets us apart in this space as well, sorry for the pun, but we decided on a fairly unique model of partnering sort of several years ago. So typically, and I think research is the vehicle or the mechanism that we are talking about today, but it's just one pillar of how we interact with the outside world. So, typically your industry partnerships or external engagement functions sit within the research office of university. And the executive at UTS made a clear decision to have that elevated outside of the research office and to focus on 3 particular pillars. So for us, we know talent is a massive area that industry wants to talk to us and engage us with. And that's obviously from a student, internship, grad, there's all different mechanisms that talent can come into play. Obviously research is of supreme importance. And I think, lots of parallels in terms of what Martin was sort of introducing all to. So I think there's a lot of commonalities there, and even sort of what Jeremy was touching on too. So research, is a very big part of the university value proposition out to the outside world. But I think what our team is trying to do is really be a lot more partner-centric and actually look at what the problems are, bringing them inside the university and seeing what is the best mechanism to actually, achieve that mutual benefit. So whether it is, student interaction or is, the academic interaction. For us, a big part of what we do is around, social justice or social impact. So for us, partnering with industry, we do want to see those types of, outcomes that are going to have societal impact there. So, it can be looking at sustainability, Indigenous employment and education, health as a thematic. So just taking a much more holistic approach to how we work with industry. I think, one thing to, I suppose, highlight right now is that in even pre-COVID times, the highlighted area that we're really focusing on with industry is around talent. So, thinking about upskilling and reskilling the workforce. So that's a really big area that, is working in parallel with research. But even, obviously on the topic of APR.Intern, we've been, fortunate enough to connect with industry through this mechanism, and a lot of the time it's been around the talent shortage or augmenting the talent within their teams via this mechanism. So I think that's a really, there's a lot of intersections between talent and research that we don't always talk about, or they're siloed, which is, the traditional nature of universities. So for us, we are, I suppose, the connectors, the facilitators, the boundary spanners that, try to make the system work as best as possible, but, through the lens of industry. So I think it's a real clear, value proposition from our perspective, is just to be able to have industry's voice heard. And I think, what Martin was saying, and obviously Jeremy's saying too, is that, it's that co-creation, or bringing them on the journey as early as possible. Because if you're trying to, give them or sell them some form of product or service or research, that's not going to, fit for purpose, then, you're going to be battling uphill. So I think those, it comes back to relationship management. So for myself and our team, most of us have worked in industry beforehand. And so we've got that, fairly good understanding, not necessarily domain expertise, but more around just, understanding what success looks like from both sides of the fence.
John, are you seeing specific, you emphasize talent, is there specific talent challenges in regards to supporting the space industry?
Yeah, I suppose in terms of space, there's been some quite interesting, activity from our end, which sort of just came about through the School of Biomedical Engineering. So one of our postdoctoral fellows, Joshua Chow, is actually doing some space cancer research, which is, I suppose, putting things out there in a slightly different way. And so his area is sort of looking at, I suppose, space biology, and I suppose this innovative approach of exploring gravitational force to discover, anti-tumor potential within this microgravity conditions. So that's a very different take, I suppose, on space, in terms of, whether it's the hard tech that is being looked to develop. One of our key strengths at UTS is around data science. So, we may not have specific capabilities in space per se, but there's some research, looking at the data science capabilities and AI and how they can be applied to space. So I think it's probably just, even that transferable skill mindset of taking some discipline that's being applied to one sector and obviously looking at space as that opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for that, John. And yeah, I could pick up on that. It's at that cross section, isn't it? Really the value of having a multidiscipline university type approach, where it's, whether it's a dedicated organization into agriculture and space, or as you say, data science, health and space, and how do tumors react in non-gravity environments and things like that. Like, yeah, that can only be done in universities. Adam, we're gonna go over to you now. Kind of, you heard a broad perspective, right, of different views. And if anybody has an oversight on what's happening within this space, space, it's you. So I'd love your thoughts on it. Who are you? What do you do? And what do you see as far as the challenges and opportunities within translating research for specifically to the space sector?
Thanks very much for the introduction, Chad. And I'd really like to thank my fellow panelists for some really stimulating conversation in the lead up to this. You've really laid some fertile ground for me. There's so many different rabbit holes I could go down. Before I continue, I think I'd like to echo Alyssa's original acknowledgement of the traditional owners of Australia and their ongoing connection to the earth, the sea, and the sky. And I think, I guess I'll point out the Australian Space Agency logo that I'm wearing on the lapel has got some Indigenous constellations on that. We're very proud to have that as our logo and representing our connection to the first Australians. So what do? I'm lucky. I've got the best job in Australia. I'm the executive director of strategic policy at the Australian Space Agency. So what I do is I work in the agency and also across government to coordinate Australia's civil space policies. The sort of the big policy document that you would have seen from us that came out last year was the Australian Civil Space Strategy. I have a hard copy here. And that sets out the government's ambitions to grow the sector. And I guess in that document, they've given us some really clear objectives. They really want us to grow the number of jobs in the Australian civil space sector. So we've got the target to triple the size of Australia's space economy and add 20,000 jobs. And I think to a certain degree, that really kind of sets the narrative for the kind of engagement that we have as a space agency. It's a little different to some of the agencies that you'll see around the world. You know, NASA's got a very clear space science and exploration mandate. Our mandate's more focused on the jobs and growth sort of narrative, and that's going to flavour the way I kind of talk about what we've spoken here. So space is important, and the context is really changing. I think everybody here knows that it really affects everything that we do here on Earth. You know, and I heard a great thing the other day. You know, how many satellites does it take to buy a bottle of milk? And the answer I had was 5. I'm not sure I could unpack what all 5 are off the top of my head, but the fact remains it's embedded in things like financial transactions, you know, how we navigate, how we get around, weather forecasting, and I think all of those kinds of things have been alluded to. Some people talk about space 2.0 as a concept, and one of the previous speakers sort of mentioned that the government really does have a role. Actually, I think it was Amidy mentioned that sort of government's got a role in terms of some of the lean investment, and certainly that's been the case to now. But this year is a real transition point. You know, last year there was something like 380 satellites launched into orbit. This year we're up to 538 satellite launches so far. We're on track to have over 1,000 satellites in space. So it's really salient that some of the conversation here has been around space situational awareness, as we call it in, I guess, the civil context, or space domain awareness, as our friends in defence side talk about it. It's getting busy up there, and there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of things are growing. And I guess the commercial driver here really is that people are seeing that value can be derived from space, and you know, that can either be in an upstream context. So you think about SpaceX, they're manufacturing their rockets, they're delivering a service. It can be in space value add, and you know, as John was just talking about, those medical applications, so things that are actually will in the future, and this is a real emerging area, add value in space. And you're hearing a lot at the moment about the opportunity to exploit resources in outer space, and that's a rabbit hole I won't go down because it's quite complex. And then of course there's also downstream applications, how we use information and data from space here on Earth. And across all of those domains, Australians are actually making a difference, and it's industry, but it's also the research sector as well. And honestly, industry can't do it without the research sector. And you know, I think Jeremy is really well placed to talk about the space domain awareness thing, but I think I'll talk about some other downstream applications. You know, picking up what Marty was talking about, agriculture. There's a couple of relatively recent announcements. Szabo recently contributed to the development of the Graincast application. So this is an application tool that's available to farmers and allows them to predict what kinds of crops they will be able to grow, and that's all backed up by some AI machine learning sort of algorithms that analyze the data and the Earth observation data to actually give some predictions about, you know, what's the weather going to do, what's the fertility of the soil like, and from a strategic perspective, how you might plan what you do, and that's a really powerful kind of tool. At a more tactical level, there's businesses like Consilium through their Gaia product that are providing direct services to agriculture, and the Gaia product at the moment is very targeted on vineyards. And you know, what they're able to do with that is to view the hyperspectral images on a kind of a day-to-day basis as that image becomes available through the Sentinel satellites and other satellites that provide hyperspectral imagery, analyze that and determine whether, well, you know, how's your water distribution going, how's your fertilizer distribution going, and you can actually change on a day-by-day basis how you're improving the productivity of the crop. And the report that sort of Consilium talk about there is that access to that product paid for itself for that business within 1 single year. So you know, space is making a transformative effect downstream. And you know, they're just a few kind of Australian examples. And we've heard about the Innovation Connections grant and how that's really made a difference for Jeremy's business. But there's other things. So to go back upstream, Gilmore Technology up in Queensland are looking at producing orbital rockets, and they've had some support through the CRCP program, and they're sort of working on developing a lightweight fuel tank or oxidizer tank that's going to be suitable for their rockets. Another great example that I'm familiar with is a manufacturing company down in Melbourne, AW Bell. Well, not a specific space application. It's a great example of a kind of role where academic and research expertise has really made a transformative effect to the business. AW Bell were able to develop an entirely new casting methodology based on their investment casting expertise that actually allowed them to be a direct supplier under the Joint Strike Fighter program. And so they're able to produce a really high property alloy casting that was actually better than the best sort of equivalent method that actually required heat treatment and hyper-eutectic or high isostatic, high pressure isostatic treatment. So that really reduced cost for the client in that case. So there are lots of businesses that are contributing in the space, and the best businesses are the ones that innovate. And the best way to innovate is to actually engage the expertise. So it's that, we've talked about that sort of valley of death between research and development. And, there's people that are here on this panel that are really intimately involved in that. So it's like having the ability to talk to James and talk to John and get connected to whichever side of the equation that you're on, because that's actually how we're going to make the difference in space. And so that comes back to kind of what my role in government is. And, in the space agency, when you have a look at our strategy, you'll see that we've got kind of 3 phases on how we want to influence this. We are the principal source of civil space policy advice to government, but we also have to coordinate across all of the different civil space agencies. And there's civil agencies in government that have an impact on space. And there's about 15 of those, and I'm talking to most of those agencies every week. But what the strategy does for us is it's our mandate from government that sets out the path to firstly set the conditions for growth. Secondly, engage in the opportunity, and thirdly, exploit those opportunities for the growth of our sector. Space isn't a domestic exploit. It's not just about Australia. It's international. So creating the conditions to enable our international engagement and to be a part of that. So whether it's in space domain awareness, where we're tracking our objects as well as objects from other countries and space junk, or whether we're opening doors for Australian businesses to be suppliers to the Moon to Mars program or the Artemis program, and that's another thing that we're working on. So I guess what we're doing, we've got a series of grants that we've been delivering. So the Space Infrastructure Fund is about establishing open source infrastructure that'll be available to support businesses and researchers. For example, the Space Data Analysis Facility in Western Australia, which is being delivered by the Pawsey Supercomputing Centre. The Mission Control Facility, which is being built by Szabo Systems, another great Australian SME down in Adelaide. We're delivering a grant called the International Space Investment, and there's 10 great projects that we've supported there. I can spend all day talking about them, but I won't. And I guess most importantly, the biggest commitment that we've got to date is $150 million from the government to support Australian businesses to join NASA's Moon to Mars mission. The supply chain grants are already open, and that's very much targeted at businesses that want to exploit opportunities in supply chains, but we'll be setting up a supply chain facilitation program. But I guess most importantly for the people in this room, you'll be most interested in the demonstrator grant programs. We're going to have about $50 million towards those 2 programs that will come under that, and a third program which is called the Trailblazer, and that'll be a large grant that will be delivered to support a major Australian project on Moon to Mars. So there's a lot of opportunity, and Australian businesses and the Australian research sector are really intrinsic to that. And so I guess my encouragement here is find that thing that you're great at, work out where it fits, and then make sure you're talking to the right researchers and you're talking to the right industry about that and get connected. I think I'll pause there.
No, that's great, Adam, and it's some really great opportunities. It sounds like obviously the investments in some of the companies that are really being highlighted are very exciting. And some of the things that you mentioned in there, as far as, industry can't do this alone. Like we need the research. And this is the theme that we've heard from all of the panelists, is that there's absolute value to be had in collaboration. Like that's without a question. But I want to, and we've got one question in here, and if you have any other questions, if you're listening, please feel free to throw them in there. This is your one opportunity. As you can hear from all the panelists, a depth of not just knowledge, but practical experience on how they do this, not just with the space sector, but also in translation. Catherine's asking, I work in a university in an engagement role. I'd be interested in hearing what the speakers think universities can do better when it comes to working together and collaborating. We know it adds value, but how do we do it? Do we want more events? Do we have more conversations? Do we have forums with staff and students? What's useful? What's timely? Both from an industry perspective, from a university perspective, from peak body perspective, a research organization, government. What can we do better? What can we do differently? What are your guys' thoughts? Maybe 1 or 2 minute answers. We've got about 8 or 9 minutes left.
I'll jump in first. Firstly, thanks for the question. I'm not trying to read any connotations into it, but I do get a sense amongst the industry sometimes that we whinge about academic institutions in terms of collaboration, but I think we've got it back to front. I reckon industry needs to do better at reaching the other way. We just can't expect to sit here and wait for the universities to come tell us about all the wonderful things that they're doing. We're the ones motivated by selling things to our customers, so we should be out there searching. So that's my first point. So how do we enable that search to be easier and be done easier? I can only go to so many open days and presentations and things. Time is not infinite. So some way that academic institutions can concisely make almost like a searchable way for me. Say I'm interested in space domain awareness. I can go to uts.edu.au, go to research projects list, which, forgive me if you've already got this, I type in space domain awareness, boom, there's what people are doing there related to space domain awareness. I can send an email to John as the facilitator, or maybe directly to the academics, and off we go, start a conversation. But I think the onus should be on industry, not necessarily the academic institutions.
Jeremy, that's great. So maybe some of the stuff that they're already doing, not more of it, but just making it more efficient, more accessible for a very busy industry that kind of needs to step up as well. Excellent. Anyone else?
Yeah, I had a similar comment, Chad, and again, works both ways, I think. But and I may have referred to this on a previous discussion, but this notion of language of capability, because that sort of underpins the whole sort of communication spectrum, be it sort of digital online content, events, and so on. But really being able to invest, time and effort in language of capability. And what I mean by that, I suppose, is not just talking about research or your particular sort of business focuses, but what it means, because that can just help resonate and sort of trigger light bulb moments with relevant audiences, be them researchers or people within businesses. Whilst that can help sort of make connections for collaboration, other sort of good outcomes, just career progression and being able to sort of really position skills, expertise, and kind of leverage from that. So it sounds simple. I realize it's not, but that's my answer to that one.
Excellent. Thanks, James. And Ali has thrown the link to Expert Connect in the chat there. And Adam, you were going to mention something.
Oops. Yeah, look, I think they're both really relevant points. I really want to echo what Jeremy says. I've worked in industry, a really terrific company, and I know there's someone who's very close to that company here. But the companies that do a really great job of this are the ones that are actively reaching into the universities, like Jeremy says. They know who that they need to talk to in the universities. They're establishing the relationships, and they're leveraging the work that's being done. And it's fundamental. Too many businesses, I think, spend the time looking at the bottom line, looking at the profitability, improving the efficiency of the business, without actually spending the time to think about, well, you know what, I need to put some effort into the technology, I need to put some effort into developing new capability and transitioning, bridging the valley of death and bringing that blue sky research into practical outcomes. You don't need to do everything, you just need to be aware of what's there, and it takes some effort.
Yeah, Adam, that's interesting. Like, and I hear your point, and Jeremy, thanks for that. But the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor research came out recently, and Australia does have an increasingly high fear of failure. We have a high rate of entrepreneurship, doing stuff inside the organization, and a decreasing aspect of nascent entrepreneurship, or kind of doing it on the outside. So between Martin and John, as we wrap up here in the last 4 minutes or so, acknowledging potentially some deep cultural challenges as well, rather than just saying, either university or industry, you need to do more, better, kind of be a different you. Are there other things that we can do to either address the culture or encourage industry, make it easier, break down some of the perceived barriers? What do you guys think?
Following on from what Jeremy said, and it was actually quite refreshing to hear, the industry perspective, and actually the acknowledgement that, industry can be doing a bit more, because I think, probably for the last few years, we've been, as a sector, reaching out and being a lot more proactive. But I think what we can do as a sector is actually listen more, because I think, we've probably been in this, whether it's external engagement, business development, relationship management, where we're pushing things as opposed to listening and trying to bring in the problems. So I think, the skill level and the expertise within the university sector in Australia is phenomenal. Like we bat above our weight internationally. But I think just understanding how relationships are developed, and I think what Jeremy said before about James and the work that CEAT does is phenomenal, because the seed funding to start a project is really the key starting point. And managing the expectations, from the academics who an ARC or an HMRC may be the end goal, but going to ask industry for $250,000 when you've only met them once or twice is not a great start to a relationship. So, part of our role and is both internal stakeholder management and making the university aware of, what is important to industry. One of the questions I'll always ask very, very early on, exploring with industry is, what is your measure of success? And, that a lot of the times is not the same as what the university's measure of success is. So how do we actually bring that closer together, or try and get alignment or crossover? Doesn't always work. And I think, being really frank and transparent with your industry, partners and contacts about this, because, sometimes, as you said before, Chad, that being risk averse, everyone wants to succeed on the first go, and it doesn't always work that way. So I think there just needs to be a lot more openness around that, and just understanding, how do we, close that gap, and bring in the right people. I think because it's, one university can't solve industry's problems, so how do we collaborate across universities? And there's a lot more mechanisms happening out there. And, I think, the role of government is so crucial here, because we don't always acknowledge government's platform that they provide for us to do this. So I think, it's a team sport, but, from a university perspective, being proactive, but more listening, and just trying to, it may not be connecting with an academic on a particular project. It could be a student-driven innovation. So, based on funding, based on, what the requirements are for the industry partner, it's just, being much more, industry-centric or partner-centric.
Excellent. Thanks, John. And we're just coming up on the top of the hour. Marty, you started us off. I might just hand it over to you to wrap it up in a minute or two. Final thoughts.
Yeah, so that should be it. I think everyone's really touched on most of the key issues. From a university point of view, the one that John made in his earlier piece when he introduced himself is really important in terms of making it as seamless and painless as possible for industry when they do reach out. So I think you need to be able to reward those who are entrepreneurial and come to the university and look for what the opportunities are. But there needs to be a one-stop shop approach to getting them to engage in the university, and the university doing the legwork to help them navigate its internal structures, because we are big organisations. Like, some universities are the size of government departments. Let's not make the mistake. They're big, they're complex. It's hard enough when you are inside the institution to navigate it, let alone coming in as an outsider. So as someone who's spent 15 years in industry and negotiating and engaging with government in part of those roles, I go to university and they're not dissimilar beasts. They are big, they are complex. So if we can find a way to make it as easy as possible, and I think that the programs that James has talked about that they've got as well, like, I think the good news story is that we've got the pieces there available to move this stuff forward in terms of the programs, the opportunities to start off for people to be able to dip their toes in the water with smaller grants, and then larger programs of work like CRCPs and ARC linkages and things like that. There's opportunity out there for those who want to engage in that space, but I think it's a combination of all the things everyone's talked about, where it just needs to be a bit more seamless and take a lot less effort for people to do it, because I think once you reduce those barriers and lower the bar, it's going to happen a lot more frequently and be a lot more useful for end outcomes and what people are trying to achieve out of it.
Excellent. Thanks, Martin. And thank you, everybody. I'm going to hand over to Ali just to wrap us up. It was, yeah, really good insights. Thanks, Catherine, for your question, just to kind of wrap everything up at the end. Sounds like there's work to be done on both sides and also a significant willingness to do that. Potentially the only thing blocking us is a bit of cultural stuff, which we can kind of work through over the next few years. So, or even months or weeks. Ali, wrap us up.
Thanks, Chad, and thank you to all of our fantastic panelists for an awesome discussion and some great insights from the space industry and their interactions with universities, and also the opportunities that are out there. So I come from my perspective from the APR.Intern program, but I know of James's program, I know of Marty's organisation, I know of John's work at UTS, and they're all of the grants that Adam has talked about today that are out there for businesses like Jeremy's to take advantage of and see that innovation and that growth that leads to bigger opportunities for their business, bigger growth. So the main themes I've been taking away from today from our discussion were, there's opportunity out there. Reach out and talk to people like me and James and Marty and John. Find those opportunities. Look at the DISA website, see what grants are available, and make those changes to your business that help you grow. There's a great opportunity there to really develop and innovate. And, you know, we're in a fantastic country in Australia. As everyone has said, we punch above our weight as far as research goes. So the world is kind of our oyster. We've just got to make it happen. And I'm going to leave it with that, Chad.
Excellent, Ali. And we'll just close off. Again, thank you everybody for attending. This will be recorded and made available afterwards. Thanks so much for the panelists. A lot of insights there. And if you want to reach out to them, we can send out their details. And if you want to engage more and connect. But apart from that, thanks and good afternoon, everybody. And thanks for a good session.
Yes, thanks. Anyone who needs to reach out or contact anyone, please feel free to send me an email through the APR.Intern website. Thanks, everyone.